A mother opens her home to her son and daughter-in-law after they lose their apartment, believing it is temporary and rooted in family love. At first life feels crowded but manageable until subtle shifts begin. The daughter-in-law rearranges rooms, speaks with authority, and slowly erases boundaries. The mother tries to stay quiet to keep peace with her son, convincing herself she is imagining things. One afternoon she returns home with groceries and finds her house key no longer works. Standing on her own porch, locked out of the home she built, she realizes the betrayal is no longer subtle. A painful confrontation follows, revealing entitlement, manipulation, and a son caught between loyalty and fear. Instead of reacting with rage, the mother takes deliberate steps to reclaim her dignity and her home, involving legal clarity, emotional restraint, and a public but calm assertion of truth. The situation forces the family to confront uncomfortable realities, and consequences ripple outward. In the end, the mother regains her home, but more importantly her sense of self, learning that kindness without boundaries invites disrespect. The story closes with reflection on motherhood, sacrifice, and the quiet strength it takes to choose self-respect even when it costs you closeness. When my key refused to turn in my own front door, I thought for a moment that my hands were shaking too badly to line it up properly. I stood there on the porch with 2 grocery bags cutting into my fingers, the plastic handles biting my skin, as if to remind me I was still standing, still outside, still waiting for permission I should never have needed. The late afternoon sun was warm on my back, but my chest felt hollow, cold, like a room that had been emptied without warning. I tried the key again, slower this time, listening carefully for the familiar click I had heard thousands of times over the years. Nothing, just resistance. Final and solid. That was the moment something inside me went quiet. Before that day I had always believed that love meant endurance, that family meant flexibility, that if you bent far enough, long enough, you could keep everyone together under one roof and call it peace. I believed that because I had built my life around it. This house had been mine for almost 30 years. I raised my son here, watched him take his first steps on the living room carpet, watched him slam his bedroom door for the first time, watched him pack his things and leave as a grown man who still hugged me a little too tightly whenever he came back to visit. The walls knew our voices. The kitchen knew my routines. Even the floorboards knew where I paused every morning to look out the front window with my coffee before the day began. I never imagined I would be standing outside that same door like a stranger. When my son Mark called me that night 6 months earlier, his voice sounded small in a way it hadn't since he was a boy. He told me he and his wife Lena had lost their apartment. Something about a sudden rent increase, a disagreement with the landlord, paperwork they hadn't expected. He rushed through the explanation as if speed could soften the blow. "It's just temporary, Mom," he said quickly. "A few weeks, maybe a month tops." I remember standing at the sink with the phone pressed to my ear, staring at the crack in the tile I had meant to fix for years. I didn't ask many questions. I didn't need to. He was my son. "Of course you can come here," I told him. "You'll stay in the guest room." Lena was quieter when I spoke to her later, polite but distant. She thanked me the way people thank a hotel, not the way they thank family. Still, I brushed it aside. Everyone carries stress differently, I told myself. The day they arrived, the house felt different immediately. Their suitcases filled the hallway, their voices echoed down corridors that had grown used to silence. I told myself the noise was good, that it meant life. I cooked that first night the way I always did when Mark was coming home, his favorite roast chicken, extra garlic, potatoes browned just right. Lena pushed the food around her plate and said she wasn't very hungry. Mark ate quickly, distracted, already scrolling on his phone. It was fine, I told myself. Everything was fine. At first Lena kept to the guest room. She unpacked neatly folded clothes, placed shoes carefully against the wall. She asked before using the washing machine, before moving things in the fridge. Her voice was soft, then almost careful. I noticed how she watched me when I spoke, as if studying my reactions. But little things began to shift. One morning I woke to find the mugs rearranged in the kitchen cabinet. My favorite one, the chipped blue ceramic I'd had for years, was gone from its usual spot. I found it later pushed to the back. Lena smiled when I mentioned it lightly. "Oh, I just needed more space," she said. "This way makes more sense." Another day I came home from work to find the throw pillows changed, the family photos on the shelf moved aside to make room for a sleek framed quote about marriage. She didn't ask. She didn't explain. She acted as if it had always been that way. I tried to laugh it off. Houses change, I told myself. People adjust. What I didn't laugh off was the way Mark began to look at me differently. He avoided my eyes when Lena corrected me in my own kitchen, when she spoke over me, when she told me how things should be done. He would shift his weight, clear his throat, and say nothing. At night when the house was quiet, I lay awake listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of their voices muffled through the walls. I wondered when my home had stopped feeling like mine. Still I said nothing. I had raised Mark alone after his father left. I had learned early that holding a family together sometimes meant swallowing words that burned on the way down. I didn't want to be the difficult mother, the one who caused tension, the one whispered about later. The first real warning came on a Sunday morning. I had planned to make pancakes the way I always did, slow, easy, a ritual I enjoyed. When I walked into the kitchen, Lena was already there, measuring ingredients, rearranging the counter, her hair pulled back like she owned the space. "Oh, I didn't know you were doing breakfast," I said gently. She didn't look up. "I usually handle mornings now," she replied. "It's more efficient." I stood there holding the bowl, feeling foolish. Mark sat at the table silent. That was the first time I felt invisible in my own home. Still, I told myself it was temporary. Just a few weeks. Weeks turned into months. The guest room door stayed closed more often. Mail began arriving in their names. Lena spoke to delivery people as if she were the homeowner. Once when a neighbor asked how long they'd been staying, she answered, "We live here," without hesitation. I corrected her later quietly in the hallway. She smiled thinly. "For now it's the same thing," she said. The night before everything broke, I noticed the sound of tools. A faint metallic clink somewhere near the front door. I asked Mark what they were doing. "Just fixing something loose," he said too quickly. I didn't push. I wish now that I had. The next day I stopped at the store after work. I remember choosing apples carefully, pressing each one the way I always did, thinking about making a pie. It felt important then, the small ordinary acts that grounded me. When I got home and stood on that porch with my key useless in my hand, the house was quiet inside. Too quiet. I rang the bell. Once. Twice. Finally the door opened and Lena stood there. Her expression didn't change when she saw me. "Oh," she said softly. "You're back early." "My key doesn't work," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. She hesitated just a second before stepping aside. "We had the locks changed," she said. "The old ones weren't safe." The air felt thick. "You didn't tell me," I said. "We assumed it would be fine," she replied, already turning away. I stepped inside slowly, every sound magnified, the door closing behind me, the unfamiliar click of a new lock sealing something I couldn't yet name. Mark was in the living room. He wouldn't meet my eyes. That night I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table long after everyone else had gone to bed, listening to the clock tick, counting years instead of seconds. I realized then that kindness without boundaries had taught them something dangerous. And I knew something had to change. The next morning I woke before dawn, the way I always did, though the house no longer greeted me the same way. The air felt tense, as if it had been holding its breath all night. I stood at the sink making coffee, listening to the unfamiliar scrape of the new lock when Lena opened the front door to step outside for a call. That sound, sharp and final, echoed through me again. I told myself to stay calm. I had learned long ago that clarity comes slower than anger but lasts longer. When Mark came into the kitchen he looked tired, his shoulders slumped like he had slept with one eye open. He poured himself coffee without asking, the way he used to when he was a teenager. The smell filled the room but brought no comfort. "We need to talk," I said quietly. He froze for a moment, then nodded and sat across from me. I watched his hands wrap around the mug, the same hands I once held when he learned to walk. "Why were the locks changed without telling me?" I asked. He swallowed. "Lena thought it would be safer." "This is my house," I said. "Safety is my decision." He rubbed his forehead. "Mom, please don't make this a big thing." I leaned back and looked at him properly, then really looked. He wasn't angry. He wasn't defensive. He was afraid. And that frightened me more than anything. When Lena entered the kitchen she carried herself like someone stepping into a room already prepared for her argument. She didn't sit. She stood behind Mark, one hand on the back of his chair, a quiet claiming gesture. We didn't mean any disrespect, she said smoothly. But things needed to change. Change, I repeated. This house needs structure, she continued. Boundaries. I almost laughed at the irony but held it back. Boundaries are discussed, I said. Not enforced with locksmiths. Her smile tightened. We're married. We need privacy. Stability. Your guests, I replied. You were. Mark flinched at that. Mom, come on. I stood slowly, feeling the weight of my years, the strength of having survived worse than this. I opened my home to you out of love, I said. Not obligation. That doesn't give you ownership. Lena crossed her arms. We live here now. The words landed heavy. Final. That was when I knew the problem wasn't the locks. It was the story she had already written in her head, one where I was a background character slowly fading out of the frame. I didn't argue further. I simply nodded and went to my room, closing the door gently behind me. Inside, I sat on the edge of the bed and breathed until my hands stopped shaking. That afternoon I called an old friend who worked in real estate law. I didn't dramatize. I didn't complain. I asked questions. Simple, clear questions about rights and notice and occupancy. That night I slept better than I had in weeks. Knowledge has a way of doing that. Over the next few days I observed quietly. Lena answered the door when deliveries arrived. She spoke to neighbors as if she were hosting. She referred to me as Mark's mom, instead of by name. Small erasures stacking one on top of the other. Mark avoided me entirely. When he did speak, it was short, careful, as if he were navigating a narrow bridge that might collapse if he stepped wrong. On Friday evening I cooked dinner and set the table the way I always had. When they sat down, Lena glanced at the dishes. I usually plan meals now, she said. It's more efficient. I placed my napkin on my lap. I won't be doing this much longer, I said evenly. She paused. What do you mean? I mean this arrangement ends soon. Silence stretched. Mark looked up, startled. You're kicking us out, he said. I'm reclaiming my home, I replied. Lena laughed softly. You can't just decide that. I can, I said. And I have. She leaned back, studying me for the first time, as if reassessing the ground beneath her feet. That weekend I gave formal notice. Written, clear, documented. I handed it to Mark myself. He read it twice, his face draining of color. You talked to a lawyer, he said. Yes. Lena's reaction was immediate, sharp. She accused me of betrayal, of cruelty, of choosing control over family. Her voice rose, but mine did not. I had learned the power of stillness. This is not revenge, I told her. It's correction. The days that followed were tense but contained. They packed in silence. The house seemed to watch with me as boxes were filled, memories displaced. Neighbors noticed. Questions were asked. I didn't explain beyond simple truth. They're moving out. On the final day Lena stood in the doorway, keys in hand. The new keys. She placed them on the table with a tight smile. You didn't have to do it this way, she said. I did, I replied. Mark hugged me before they left. His arms felt uncertain. I'm sorry, he whispered. So am I said, and meant it. When the door closed behind them, the house exhaled. I walked through each room, slowly touching walls, shelves, doorframes, reclaiming more than space. That evening I called a locksmith and watched as the locks were changed again, this time with consent and clarity. The click of the new key felt different, grounding, rightful. I sat on the porch after sunset, listening to the familiar sounds return. Crickets whined, distant laughter. Home. I learned then that love does not mean surrendering yourself inch by inch until there is nothing left to protect. It means knowing when to stand firm even when your voice shakes. The house was quiet, but I was not alone. I had myself. The first night after they left I didn't turn on the television. I didn't play music. I let the house speak in its natural voice. The soft settling of wood, the hum of the refrigerator, the gentle tick of the clock in the hallway. It felt like listening to an old friend after a long misunderstanding. I slept in the center of the bed instead of clinging to the edge. When I woke the next morning, sunlight spilled across the floor the way it used to before everything felt crowded. I stood there in my bare feet, breathing it in, and for the first time in months my chest didn't feel tight. But peace doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in pieces, and some of those pieces are sharp. Mark didn't call for 3 days. When he finally did, his voice was strained, polite, like a coworker checking in, not a son reaching out. He asked how I was doing. I said I was fine. He said they were settling into a short-term rental. I said I was glad they had somewhere safe. There was so much he didn't say and so much I refused to fill in for him. The following week my sister came by unannounced. She walked through the house slowly, taking it in the cleared surfaces, the rearranged furniture, the absence of tension she could feel even without knowing the details. "So it's true," she said, finally sitting at the kitchen table. "They changed your locks." I nodded. She shook her head. "I don't know how you stayed so calm." "I wasn't calm," I said. "I was deliberate." Word travels quickly in small communities. Some people sympathized openly. Others kept their distance, unsure which version of the story was safer to believe. I didn't correct anyone. I told the truth when asked and let silence do the rest. A week later Lena showed up alone. She knocked this time. I opened the door and saw the strain on her face, the tightness around her eyes. She looked smaller without Mark beside her, without the house behind her like a shield. "I just want to talk," she said. I stepped aside. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one she had once claimed with such certainty. She didn't touch anything. "I didn't mean for it to go that far," she said quietly. I studied her for a moment, then spoke. "You didn't ask because you didn't think you had to." She looked down. "We needed stability. You needed control," I replied, not unkindly. "And you took it from the wrong place." Tears filled her eyes but didn't fall. "I felt invisible my whole life," she said. "I wasn't going to be invisible again." I nodded slowly. For the first time I understood her, not excused her but understood. Hurt people often mistake dominance for safety. "This house was the only thing I had left that was fully mine," I said. "And you tried to erase me from it." She whispered an apology. It sounded real. It also came too late. When she left I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clear. Mark came by the following Sunday. He stood in the doorway, hesitant like a guest unsure of his welcome. "I should have spoken up," he said eventually. "Yes," I replied. "I didn't want to choose sides." "Sometimes not choosing is still a choice," I said gently. He nodded, tears in his eyes. We sat together quietly, no fixing, no defending, just the truth between us. Over time our relationship found a new shape, slower, more careful but honest. I no longer rushed to soften things for him. I let him sit with his discomfort. That was part of his growing. I repainted the guest room a soft, warm color. I donated what they left behind. I planted new flowers along the porch. Each small act felt like stitching myself back together. One evening as I locked the door I paused and listened to the click of the key. It no longer startled me. It grounded me. I learned that hospitality without respect becomes self-erasure. That love without limits teaches others how to cross you. And that reclaiming your space is not cruelty, it is survival. The house still holds memories, some painful, some sweet, but now they are mine again. And every morning when I stand at the window with my coffee I feel present, solid, whole. After Lena's visit the house settled into a quieter rhythm, but my thoughts did not. Silence has a way of inviting reflection, and reflection can be both a balm and a blade. I found myself replaying moments I had brushed aside, the first rearranged cabinet, the first interruption, the first time my son looked past me instead of at me. Each memory arrived with a question I hadn't asked soon enough. I didn't regret opening my door. I regretted closing my eyes. I went back to work the following Monday and noticed how my shoulders felt lighter without the constant tension of anticipating someone else's needs. Colleagues commented that I seemed rested. I smiled and said nothing. Some changes are too personal to summarize. That week I received a message from a neighbor asking if everything was all right. She had noticed the moving truck and the locksmith. I replied simply that it was a family matter and that I was fine. The truth didn't require embellishment. Friday evening I invited my sister back for dinner. I cooked slowly, enjoying the familiar choreography of my kitchen. The sizzle of onions, the steady rhythm of chopping, the scent of herbs warming in oil. We ate at the table without anyone correcting my methods or timing. She watched me closely, then reached across and squeezed my hand. "You look like yourself again," she said. I felt tears prick my eyes and laughed softly. I didn't realize how much I'd disappeared. Over the next few weeks Mark called more often. Our conversations were tentative but sincere. He asked about my day. I asked about his. We avoided Lena's name at first, then slowly began to include her without tension. Healing rarely arrives in dramatic speeches. It shows up in small brave honesty. One afternoon he came by with a box. "I found some things that belong to you," he said. Inside were old photo albums, letters, recipes written in my handwriting. I hadn't realized they were missing. Seeing them felt like being handed pieces of myself I didn't know I'd lost. "I should have protected you," he said quietly. I closed the box and looked at him. "You're learning how," I replied. As summer moved in, I spent more time outside. I repaired the loose step on the porch, planted tomatoes along the fence. Each task was grounding, tangible proof that I could tend to my life without asking permission. One afternoon I ran into Lena at the grocery store. She hesitated, then approached. We exchanged polite words, nothing more. There was no bitterness in the encounter, only distance, and that felt like progress. Later that night I sat alone on the porch watching the sky darken. I thought about all the women I knew who had been taught to give endlessly, to smooth, to accommodate, to sacrifice quietly until there was nothing left to offer. I thought about how easily love becomes obligation when boundaries aren't spoken. I wished I had known sooner that saying no does not make you heartless. It makes you whole. Months passed. The house became a place of warmth again. Friends visited. Laughter returned. I hosted a small dinner and noticed how naturally I took up space, how comfortable it felt to be seen and heard without shrinking. Mark and Lena eventually found a place of their own. He told me about it with cautious optimism. I wished them well and meant it. Letting go doesn't always mean cutting ties. Sometimes it means changing the terms. On the anniversary of the day the locks were changed, I stood at the front door holding my key. I turned it slowly, listening to the familiar sound, and smiled. Not because of what I had lost, but because of what I had reclaimed. I learned that dignity is quiet. It doesn't shout or threaten. It stands firm and waits for the world to adjust. The house is still here. So am I. The older I get, the more I understand that time doesn't heal on its own. It reveals. It strips things down until only the truth is left standing. In the months after everything happened, I began to see my past not as a straight line of sacrifices, but as a series of choices, some made out of love and some made out of fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of being seen as difficult. Fear of losing my son. That fear had taught me to be quiet when I should have been clear. One evening in early autumn, I was sorting through a drawer in the hallway, the one that collects everything no one knows where to put. Old keys, receipts, rubber bands, a single earring I never found the match for. At the bottom I found the old house key, the one that stopped working that day on the porch. I turned it over in my hand, feeling its weight, remembering how small it had felt when it suddenly meant nothing. I didn't throw it away. I placed it in a small wooden box on my dresser. Not as a reminder of pain, but as proof that I survived it. Mark came over the following weekend. He looked different, calmer, maybe even lighter. He helped me clean the garage, something he used to do without complaint when he was younger. We worked side by side, sweeping dust, sorting boxes, neither of us rushing to fill the quiet. At one point he paused and said, "I didn't know how to stand up to her without losing her." I leaned on the broom and looked at him. "You don't stand up to someone to lose them," I said. "You do it to keep yourself." He nodded, slowly absorbing the words the way he used to absorb lessons as a boy, when he pretended not to listen but remembered everything. Later we sat on the steps drinking lemonade, watching the sun dip low. He told me about counseling, about learning how to speak without shutting down. I listened without interrupting. Growth sounds quiet when it's real. As winter approached, the house felt fuller, not with people but with presence. I decorated slowly, placing ornaments that had been tucked away during the chaos. I cooked meals just for myself and enjoyed them without guilt. I invited friends over without worrying about anyone else's comfort more than my own. One night a storm rolled in, hard and sudden. Wind rattled the windows, rain lashed the roof. I stood in the hallway listening and felt safe, deeply, solidly safe. The locks held. The walls held. I held. It occurred to me then that home isn't just a place you open to others. It's a place that must also protect you. Lena sent a message around the holidays. Short, careful, apologetic. She thanked me for what I had done for them, even if she hadn't understood it at the time. I replied kindly but briefly. Forgiveness does not require reopening doors. On New Year's Day I woke early, brewed coffee, and sat by the window watching the world begin again. I thought about all the women who would start the year promising themselves to be smaller, quieter, easier. I hope they would choose differently. If there is one thing this experience gave me, it was clarity. Love that costs you your voice is not love. Help that erases you is not kindness. And peace that depends on your silence is not peace at all. I don't know what the future holds for my relationship with my son and his wife. Life has a way of continuing beyond our neat conclusions. But I know this: I will never again give someone the power to lock me out of my own life. The house still creaks at night. The floors still remember footsteps that are gone. But when I turn the key now, I do it with certainty, not fear. I am home. As I sit here now telling you this story, the house is quiet in the best possible way. Not the tense silence that tiptoes around conflict, but the kind that settles softly around you like a shawl. The kind that lets you hear your own thoughts again. I still make my coffee the same way every morning. I still pause by the front window. But now when I do it, I feel rooted, not cautious. I no longer scan the room wondering who I might upset by simply existing as I am. What happened to me wasn't just about locks or keys or a daughter-in-law who forgot her place. It was about how easily we teach people how to treat us when we confuse love with endurance. When we believe that being a good mother means being endlessly accommodating even when it costs us our sense of self. I loved my son enough to open my door. I loved myself enough to close it again. That balance took me years to learn. If you're listening to this and you feel yourself shrinking in your own home, in your own family, in your own life, I want you to know something very clearly. You are not cruel for needing boundaries. You are not selfish for wanting respect. And you are not wrong for choosing dignity even when it disappoints the people you love. Sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is stop explaining herself. So I'll ask you the same question I asked myself standing on that porch with my groceries cutting into my hands. If someone took your kindness for permission, what would you do next? If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of your own journey or helped you feel less alone, I hope you'll share your thoughts in the comments. Your stories matter too. And if you'd like to hear more real-life stories about family boundaries, betrayal, healing, and quiet strength, don't forget to subscribe and stay with me a while. Until next time, take care of your heart. And protect your home in every sense of the word.